A word of warning, this podcast explores graphic and disturbing stories and includes some strong language. It therefore may not be suitable for our young listeners or other folks who may find it disturbing. Hello and welcome to True Crime Daily's My Favorite Case. Everyone in the world of true crime has a story to tell about a case that they worked in. Some are high profile, some you've maybe never heard of, but they are all fascinating. Today's case is a really high profile case. It is about the hunt for a killer. The victim was burned alive in his car, and the woman convicted of killing him sits on California's death row. The case involves drugs and white supremacists. And the man who worked this homicide is Danny Smith. He was an LA County Sheriff's deputy at the time. Now he is retired and he is a prolific writer of crime novels. You have one in the background there. Danny, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Anna. It's good to see you again.
It's good to see you. Danny and I actually worked on a case for Crime Watch Daily. So that's how we know each other for the last few years. It's a case that was close to your heart. Now, it's interesting to me, Danny, that of all the cases that you could have discussed on this program, and you've even worked on the murder case against music producer Phil Spector, that this was the case that really stood out for you. This is a case that was really important to you. Why is that?
Well, it's truthfully, it's the most tragic. Well, not the most, but it's one of the most tragic cases I've ever worked. And it's the type of a case that has broad appeal to true crime fans because it's one of those stories it's unbelievable, truthfully.
Yeah, it is. It's quite tragic. Let's just go through a quick summary of the case, and then you can tell us all the details of what it was like to work this case. The victim here is 61-year-old William Whiteside, and he was killed on February 28th of 2003 in Lancaster, California. William was a maintenance worker at a local hospital, and he was found dead almost 2 weeks later. He had been burned alive in the trunk of his car, an incredibly violent and vicious murder. Charged and ultimately convicted in this crime are the following people. There were several of them. His live-in girlfriend at the time, who was 36, Valerie Martin. Valerie Martin was convicted of murder and she was sentenced to death, which, takes a lot to get to that point in a case in California. Her son, who was 16 years old at the time, Ronald Kupchik. Is that a correct pronunciation?
Kupch.
Thank you. So her son, 16-year-old Ronald Kupch, was convicted of murder and sentenced to life without parole. His friend, who was only 14 years old at the time, Bradley Zoda, because he was a juvenile, he agreed to testify against the others, and for his cooperation, he entered into a plea deal. He pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. And then the final person in this case, 28-year-old Christopher Kennedy, who was an ex-con, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to life without parole. So 3 of the 4 were sentenced to prison. And even though Valerie was sentenced to death because of the current status of the death chamber in California, pretty much those who are sitting on death row are in effect, they're there for life. That the shocking, besides the fact that this was so violent, is that you also had very young people involved. You had a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old involved in this murder. So the basic facts of the case are William Whiteside, who was divorced and had grown children of his own, had met his girlfriend Valerie at the hospital where they both worked. And William had moved in with her a few months prior to the murder. Do you want to pick it up from there, Danny?
Yeah, sure. So an important element of this is William Whiteside was a Native American, actually registered to a tribe and the whole works. And the reason that's important is because the suspects in this case, other than Valerie Martin, the mother of 16-year-old Ronald Kupch, also he goes by Ray, but they were skinheads. They were part of Aryan white supremacist skinhead gangs. And they would refer to William Whiteside to his face with the N-word. That's what they called him, because he was someone other than white, and that's an important factor in this case, obviously. But and it was Valerie Martin who moved in with William, actually, and she had sort of a checkered past. And William Whiteside, being 61, he was working at the hospital. He's a guy that's never been in trouble with anything in his life. He lived a pretty modest and organized life. He had a nice mobile home and a nice little trailer park in Lancaster. And Valerie Martin really didn't have much. You know, she kind of bounced around, and she was a mess. And she hooked on to William Whiteside and very quickly moved into his trailer with him. So, you know, it was an okay relationship for a short period of time. And then Valerie's son, Ray, Ronald Kupch, he gets out of juvenile hall. And when he does, he hooks up with his mom. And of course, she talks William into letting him stay there because he's got nowhere to go. And then pretty soon, all of Ray's friends start hanging around. And pretty soon they're using meth and other drugs. And of course, Valerie gets involved in this too, because she's a user of, you know, she's been a user in the past. So at some point, William Whiteside really became tired of the whole thing, and he didn't want the boys around, and he was putting some pressure on Valerie. So that's when there became a bit of a divide. Now, if I can back up a little bit, the way this case came in, it was a missing persons case. And what happened with this was Valerie Martin, she made the report saying that you know, her boyfriend that she lives with, you know, that he's gone missing. And of course, from the very beginning, the missing persons detail is a unit within the LA Sheriff's Homicide Bureau. And everyone that works that unit, those individuals, those investigators, are former homicide detectives. They're you know, it's kind of like people that go to the unsolved unit, the cold case unit. It's people that are kind of moving on from the floor where they're working crazy hours, and they take a job that's more of a Monday through Friday 9-to-5 deal. But they're very experienced investigators, and they're former homicide detectives. And from the very beginning, the detective, Judy Gibson, who had this case, she didn't like it. And she said, you know, this thing's not good. So she monitored it for a few days, and then she asked our lieutenant, she said, you know, I'd like to put a team on this. And that's how my partner, Bob Keeney, and we got involved in the case. We were up for murders, so we were the next team to go out, and they gave us the case. So our first order of contact was Valerie Martin. She filed the missing persons case. So she's going to be our contact through this. And of course, even though we think that there's some suspicious circumstances, truthfully, she is the person that we have to get the bulk of information from. And that's kind of how the case started. So before I ramble too long, did you have any questions about that?
Yeah. So I find that interesting because, you know, statistically, most people are murdered by people who they know. Almost always, not always, but almost always, right? So one has to wonder, Danny, you and also the other officer who was working missing persons, the person who's calling in is the significant other. And that is where suspicion would automatically go, yet that's who you have to get information from. So my question to you is, were you suspicious of Valerie from the very beginning?
Well, sure. I mean, Judy was able to give us enough information that she had seen some red flags on this, and so you know, there were some things that had happened. The victim's ATM card had been used, and there were some photographs of a young white male with a shaved head at 2 or 3 different banks withdrawing money within the 24 hours after after William Whiteside went missing. And we knew that Valerie had 2 sons, and it didn't take long to figure out that one of them was living with her. The other one lived quite a distance away and really wasn't involved with his mom at all. So it didn't take long to start looking at these people, and especially, you know, we talked to Valerie, and She immediately made some mistakes in giving us different information than she'd given before. And quite frankly, she was so nervous. She got so upset about things that we had spoken with her once, and then we went back to speak with her a second time. And I don't recall now if it was even the same day or another day, but she literally let us into her home, William's home actually, and then said, and we told her, we said, Valerie, we want to talk to you some more, but we want to do it down at the station. And she says, okay, let me change. And she went into a bedroom, and we hear some commotion, and it was pretty clear that she was going out a window. So she jumps out of a window
Oh
of a
no.
mobile home, and she takes off running through this trailer park. So you got these two old white guys, running through a trailer park in suits, chasing a woman, for crying out loud. Thankfully, we caught her. I caught her. My partner jumped in the car and kind of drove past her to cut her off. But, you'd never live that one down if you didn't catch the 35-year-old woman. But, and at that point, that created some complications, because when someone runs, police naturally, when you catch them, there's force that's used, because in today's world, any hands-on is force. If I just take your arm and put it behind your back, that's force. And once you have physical force that's used, there's a lot of things that change. And from that point on, you could say, okay, well, now, is this a custodial interview? Do they need their Miranda warning? There were a lot of things that happened. And long story short, we got everything calmed down and talked to her until she was more reasonable about what we were there to do. She agreed to go to the station with us. We told her she was not under arrest. And in fact, just to make sure that she understood that, we took her to a place in the station that she was able to walk right out if she wanted to. And we told her that she could. Made clear, let her go to the restroom unaccompanied, so that, there was no detention whatsoever. And we talked to her for about 3 hours. And during that conversation, it was a very, very heavy deal. And I guess I should say there's so much that goes on in the homicide investigation that prior to this, by then, we had located a couple of witnesses. The witnesses were also uncooperative. We chased a lot of people in this case. One of the witnesses, we ended up chasing him twice and catching him both times. And once he was caught, then he started telling us, well, I'm just afraid because I know so much about the case. And he was there when they disposed of the evidence. He had firsthand account of the things that these individuals did. There were some other witnesses that were present for different parts of the case after the murder itself. And by then we had it pretty locked in, and we didn't necessarily need Valerie Martin's confession, but I wanted it because, quite frankly, it's, she wasn't there at the onset of the crime, but she was there when he was killed. So
Danny, correct me if I'm wrong here, but according to court records, the plot that was actually hatched to kill William, that apparently the suspects, at least 3 of them, maybe 4 of them, they had all been smoking meth. And while they were smoking meth, Valerie mentions that she owes drug dealers $300 and they need money to pay their debt. And somehow in this drug-induced state, they hatch this plot where they say that they're actually going to get William when he's coming off work, and they're going to jump him and steal his wallet. This is the plot that they hatched. And then I think they actually went so far as to try it and then realized this is too public. So they came up with another plan, which was to lure William to another location, claiming that Valerie needed to be picked up. And then they assaulted him, William, with baseball bats. And then they put him in the trunk of the car, and then they set the car on fire.
Yeah, that's correct. Mostly correct. There's a few things that aren't absolutely correct. And it is kind of hard to tell this story because there's so much that happened and trying to be concise. But yes, eventually what we find out, the facts of the case are that they come up with this plan of how to get some money. And whether or not it's because Valerie owed $300 for drugs, I don't know. I never necessarily believed that wholeheartedly. I think they wanted him out of their life. You know, they had a good thing going on, and they just thought, if he's not around, we get some cash, plus we live here. You know, people on meth don't necessarily think things through real well. But he gets off at midnight, and she calls the hospital, and she says, hey, you know, can you go pick Ray Ray up because his car's broke down? And he agrees to do so, and she sends him to this very remote place out in the desert. And she says that's where the boys are, and there's a kind of a meth hangout out there. And so when William arrives to this location, Ray Ray's there along with these other two individuals, Christopher and Bradley, and they come up to the car, and one of them gets into the car, and the other two come to the driver's window, and they immediately start beating him. And they beat him. They crack his head with these sticks that they call the N-word beaters, and they mess him up, and they put him in the trunk of his car, and then they drive off. And while they're driving around, they're one of them remembered, oh, Mom said we're supposed to get the wallet. So they pull over, they open the trunk, and he's still in the trunk, mostly alive, and I guess moving around. So they get the wallet, they beat him some more, they drive further, they hear some commotion in the trunk, and they think he's trying to get out, and they stop and they beat him again. And anyways, during this whole thing, they call Valerie Martin, and they tell her, okay, this is where we are now. And they've driven further out into the desert to a very remote location. And Valerie gets in her vehicle because she's at home, and these three are further out in the desert, and she gets some gasoline. She drives out there, and they torch the car. And Christopher, he's pouring gasoline on it. Ray Ray lights it before he's done. Christopher gets burned. His leg and his arm were burned pretty bad. They're all high on drugs, so Ray Ray's laughing and, you know, calling him a dumbass and things like that. This is the scene that's going on while this man is in the trunk of his car dying. Excuse me. And Valerie's there. She's there watching the entire thing. And Bradley had gotten into the car with Valerie, and he was watching as well. But then they leave, and they go back to William's house, and a couple of them shower, and they talk about, we have to get all of our clothes gathered up. It's going to have to be burned.
So, Danny, I find this interesting. So one of the suspects in this case actually gets burned while setting William on fire and the car on fire. Did he get treatment in the hospital? And how did that unfold as far as potential evidence against him as a murder suspect?
Well, that is a very interesting part of this, in fact. And this is where some really great luck happened. Basically, they went back to William's house. They got rid of all the clothing that they were wearing. They put it in bags, trash bags. A couple of them showered, as I recall. They pick up Ray Ray's girlfriend, who was still at the house during all of this. And then they drive over to Christopher's house. And on the way there, Christopher calls his mother, who he lives with. Christopher's the 27-year-old, and says, Mom, get your car out of the garage. And this is 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning. So she's not happy, but she does what he says, and she gets the car out of the garage so that they can park in the garage and basically be hidden. And they all go into Christopher's room. This is Christopher, Bradley, Ray Ray, Valerie, and Ray Ray's girlfriend. I don't recall her name off the top of my head, but so the five of them are in this very small little bedroom, a child's bedroom in an old house. And they're basically crashing in there. They've got a black light going, and they're laughing at, that they can see some blood on different, people's arms or whatever. And they eventually are kind of crashing. And then the next morning at about 7 o'clock, Christopher's parole officer shows up, and that was completely coincidental. He showed up to check on Christopher, and he goes into the room, and a great, piece of police work on his part, very intelligently, he's like, who are all these people and why are they with my parolee? And he documents each person. So now we've got them locked just hours after this murder. They're all together and it's all documented. Well, he violates Christopher because he's high on meth. I don't remember if they had meth with them, but they had contraband. So he violates him and takes him to jail. So Christopher is shipped off to jail long before I even get this case. And he's sitting at the county jail as the rest of this case unfolds. And eventually, my partner and I, we write a search warrant. Even though he's in custody, we have to do a search warrant because we want to search his body. We want to search his person for evidence of these burn marks because we have that information now. And we take him to a burn specialist who is able to tell us, the types of burns, the degree of burns, the approximate length of time from when he examined them to when the burns occurred, which was all consistent with the murder.
And while this is going on, I'm curious, Danny. So while he's being checked for his burns and he knows why he's being checked, is anything changing in his demeanor? Does he appear like he's going to start cooperating? Because that's an awful lot of pressure. When you're standing there in front of a burn specialist, a doctor, it's like they know, like the cops know.
Yeah, no, he lawyered up right away. He wouldn't answer any questions. He knew that he was in a lot of trouble. He knew that we had him dead bang at that point. He probably knew that having, Valerie Martin involved in this thing, a 14-year-old kid involved in this thing, all the various tweakers that they were hanging around with in those several days after the murder, destroying evidence, burning clothes, doing all of this. I'm sure he knew that someone's going to talk, if not several people. And he just, he was a convict, he's a convicted felon. He'd been in and out of the joint, so he knew.
After a year and a half at home, many of you are starting to travel again, both for fun and for work, which means you may be connecting to unsecure Wi-Fi at the airport, a restaurant, or at the hotel. It's hard not to. You're sitting there and you want to answer your emails, so you feel like you don't have a choice, right? Well, you may not realize that public Wi-Fi is notorious for being a hotbed for hackers to steal your data. I never use public Wi-Fi. I've done a bunch of stings and reports, and I have watched hackers easily get into your email and into your social media accounts. But by using NordVPN on your phone, your laptop, or your iPad, you can be protected from hackers, and it gives you peace of mind while you're traveling. In the past, using a virtual private network would slow down the internet connection, making it harder for it to work. But NordVPN is the fastest VPN in the world, and you don't have to sacrifice internet speed for better security. I can use NordVPN on up to 6 devices, so that means all of my devices are protected. NordVPN is about the same cost as buying a cup of coffee every month, a small price to pay for premium cyber security. Plus, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee if NordVPN is just not for you, so there's no risk. And now, we've got a Cyber Month deal for you. Just go to nordvpn.com/TCD or use the code TCD for True Crime Daily to get up to 73% off your NordVPN plan, plus a bonus gift. Who doesn't love a bonus gift? That's nordvpn.com/TCD or use the code TCD to get 73% off your NordVPN plan plus a bonus gift. The other thing I'm very curious about here is, so now you have one person being taken into custody because he's violated parole, right? So he's a key player in all of this, and you're checking him for burn marks and everything else. Meanwhile, where is William? Is William still in the trunk when Christopher gets picked up by his parole officer?
Well, yeah. So they burned the car. They set the car on fire, and we later proved through an autopsy that William Whiteside was still alive in the car and burned to death. So The vehicle was called in as just a vehicle out in the desert that was put on fire. And that's not uncommon. A lot of criminals will steal cars, they go commit crimes, and then they set the car on fire. And so the
Wait
car
a minute.
was it.
So Danny, are you telling me that the car was found, but no one knew that William was in the trunk?
Yeah, the car was found the next day. And
oh no.
yeah, yeah, and the car was impounded, and an arson report was written, and William was still a missing person, but also at that point, those dots hadn't been connected that the vehicle that he was in, was William Whiteside's vehicle. At least it hadn't, the connection hadn't been made over to our case.
So wait a minute. So it was William's car. It's torched in the desert. It gets called in as an abandoned vehicle. It gets impounded, and William is still in the trunk. And yet the authorities have not opened this car to figure out that there's a body in there.
It's a little bit worse than that. I hate to admit this, but so an arson investigator is sent to investigate the case. And I think at that point, the connection had been made that this is the vehicle of a missing person. And so he went and he searched the car, and he even opened the trunk, but he did not see William Whiteside in the trunk.
How is that possible?
Well, it's possible because I can tell you, when I found this out, at some point during this investigation, when we found out that he was burned alive in the car, because at this point we knew that, okay, his car was recovered and it was burned. But of course, we didn't know that he was burned alive in the car until someone confessed that to us. So once that confession came, when I first found out that his car had been burned and it was at the impound, I checked and made sure that arson explosives had gone and looked at this vehicle, and I was told, yeah, they did, and there's no body. Well, you can imagine how much is going on. Ray's on the run, Bradley's on the run, Christopher's in jail, Valerie's jumping out of windows. So there's a lot going on, and we're working, 18, 20-hour days trying to put this case together in those first couple of days. And we're tracking down all of these different witnesses, people that were involved in different parts of the aftermath. And so the car, since someone else had looked at it, an arson investigator, it really wasn't a huge thing to me until Bradley Zotis confessed that he was in the car when we set it on fire.
So does that mean you went back out and said, we got to look at this car? And then how badly burned to the point, like there wasn't a skeleton? Is that why no one would have known that he was burned in the car?
So I called an arson investigator who I was personal friends with, a guy that top-notch investigator, and I knew that I could rely on him, and I said, hey, meet me at the tow yard. I need you to go through this car with me. So he does, and when we open the trunk and we're looking in there, I don't see a body either, and it takes a while before in the arson investigator is pointing, going, isn't that a skull? And finally I'm like, oh, I see it now. Excuse me.
Oh, my goodness, Danny, I can't even believe this. That's amazing.
Well, there's so much ash that's left behind. Everything that burned is just, it's piles of ash. And he was in as far back away from the opening of the trunk as you can get, which is very, very common for burn victims. Like if you find a person that dies in a home fire, they're usually in a corner. They're trying to escape, and usually with the smoke, they can't. They find themselves in a corner, and that's where they succumb, usually to smoke inhalation. But yeah, so he was in the very far back. I mean, as far as you could crawl back there, to where, if you had a bag of groceries back there, you'd have to really reach in and dig deep to get it out. So it took a while to see. And once I saw the head, then I was able to make out the shapes of the rest of a human form.
So now you realize that William has been in the trunk of this charred car the entire time. And it matches the information given to you by the youngest of the suspects. Was the youngest suspect the one who basically broke first?
No, Valerie Martin broke first, and it was our interview with her on that afternoon or evening, actually, after she had jumped out of the window and ran from us, that she told us most of the story. And she gave us a self-serving statement, but she did confess to setting it up, to calling William and sending him out there. And that's really all you need, period, to convict her of this murder. But she also tried to come up with this story about, we're just going to have him rob William and take his money, and no one was supposed to get hurt. And of course, my question was, so what do you suppose you would have talked about the next morning over breakfast? Sorry they cracked your head open. I mean, that's an absurd. No one buys that. The jury obviously didn't buy that. You can't say that, I'm going to call you and send you out, and my son's going to beat you and rob you, but that's all. We'll still see you back at the house later. I mean, clearly they intended to murder him from the very beginning, and that's where that premeditation and intent is so important. Proving that it really made the case. That the fact that there were all of the various elements as far as motive.
So what I want to know about Valerie is, what do you believe was her motivation? If she were a white supremacist, why would she be with a man of color?
I don't know that she was necessarily a white supremacist. Her kid was, and his friends were. She was a drug addict. She used meth and she liked it. And, like other people who have spent their life making bad choices and going down bad roads, I think that she just did some really stupid things. And there's a lot of murders that happen behind meth, probably more than any other drug I've ever seen in my career. People just lose their minds with that stuff. And I don't think she was thinking. I mean, clearly she wasn't. And I'll tell you, in the interview, I honestly believe that she didn't know that William was still alive. And she broke down when I told her that. She had real tears. She had tried to cry earlier in the interview and there were no tears, but she kind of lost it there because, I kind of hit her with it, and told her, that's your boyfriend was being burned to death in the trunk of that car. And there's no doubt in my mind that he died thinking about you and you were outside of the car. And she had no idea. She had no idea he was still alive. And I do believe that, but it doesn't matter either, other than the fact that it's just that much more heinous of a crime. But she thought they were just covering up the murder.
What I'm trying to also understand is, why do you think she wanted him dead? If you believe that she wanted him dead, like what was it? Or again, I guess because of the fact that they're all on meth, that nobody's thinking clearly.
Well, there's that, and the fact that she knew he had money. He was a hardworking guy, and he saved his money. And like I said, he had a nice, modest home, and he lived within his means. She knew he had a bank account. And she knew the code to his ATM, and that's why she told Ray to make sure that he got the wallet. But for the money, and because I think that she knew that her time there wasn't going to be lasting much longer. William was sick of all of it. Tired of Valerie, tired of her kid, tired of these white punks that are in his home calling him the N-word because he's a Native American. Is just absurd as that is, but that's how they treated him because they're skinheads. They're idiots.
So if she confesses to you what happened, then how do things then change when it's time to take this thing to court?
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Well, was there a trial, or did she couldn't have done a plea deal because you can't be sentenced to death in a plea deal. You're not allowed in California. It has to be a trial.
Yeah, no, I mean, we got the confession and parts of that were used against her, but no, she didn't, none of them, other than Bradley. Bradley took a deal and pled guilty and received a lighter sentence to testify against the others. But Ray, Christopher, and Valerie, the three of them, they fought it to the end. I mean, they really had no choice. What else could they do?
That's what I mean. So she confessed to you. You say she confessed to you, but when it came time for the trial, their plea was not guilty and they were going to fight it and deny it the whole time.
Yeah, and that's really actually pretty common. I mean, a lot of times we'll get confessions and they're never even introduced into court for a variety of reasons. But, people, in fact, I would guess that probably the bulk of people that confess to the police, they end up getting a lawyer that says, yeah, we're gonna try to keep that out of court, and we're pleading not guilty. They're gonna fight it because, what other choice do they have?
I'm curious, why did Valerie get the death sentence, but not the other defendants?
I am not entirely sure about that, to be honest with you, but I think that the jury saw that that how evil a person could be to send their, I'm going to use the word loved one. I mean, they were living together. I think that you could use that term. Send your loved one off to death. You plan the thing. You could argue that the boys were younger and influenced by her decisions, and she told them what to do. And she went and got the gasoline and drove it out to the desert. It's pure evil. Everything, the whole thing is pure evil. But just imagine, when you go to bed with somebody, you trust that person. And I've often said, some of the worst, some of the most tragic murders that just really stay with a person and bother, an investigator, are these murders where the person killed trusted and loved the killer, whether it's a spouse or a child. It's just, it's unimaginable. And thankfully the jury saw that, and they said that she needs to pay for the crime, the heinous crime that the four of them committed. And I'm glad that they gave her the death sentence. California won't ever put her to death, but at least she won't get out of prison. And I believe that's appropriate.
So she's one of the few women who sits on death row. There aren't a lot of women who are often sentenced to death row.
Now, a very small percentage of the population on death row throughout the country are women. Very, very small percentage. I used to know that number. I don't remember it now. I think it's like 8% or something. I don't remember. Maybe even lower than that.
So do you feel, one of the conversations I have often on the regular podcast and with everyone who comes on the program is about justice. Do you believe in this case there was finally justice?
Oh, absolutely. I do. I believe because, like I said, they're not going to put Valerie to death. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't rejoice if they did. I mean, I'm for the death penalty, but, I'm just glad that she's going to spend the rest of her life in prison, and Christopher and Ray, they will as well. And I can tell you, those two are dangerous people. Ray, the 16-year-old, he exemplifies evil. And if he were out again, he would kill again. In fact, I'm sure he'll kill in prison if he hasn't already.
Wow. What a very gruesome and heinous murder this is. It's so interesting that this is the one that stuck with you, that you wanted to talk about.
Well, there's several, I mean, about another case. You and I went out to the site, and I kind of actually anticipate you asking, why wouldn't you have said that case? Well, you know why? Because I don't really talk about that case.
Yeah. And we're not going to get into the details, but what I'll say to everyone is that basically that case revolved a father who literally tossed his child off a cliff, pretended and made it look like an accident. And you and your partner finally got to the bottom of it. And sadly, a child was murdered. It was a horrific case Horrific case.
Yeah.
That's where I met you. It is. And it's a very emotional case, very emotional case. They're also tragic. They really are. And again, always brings us back to what is justice. At least in this case, there have been convictions for the people involved and appeals exhausted, and they're going to sit in prison. So I suppose you could look at it that way as far as justice. So I'm curious, you also said you write so many books, and we're going to talk about your latest book, but you said you may want to actually write a book about this case.
Well, so the book that's on the background there, Nothing Left to Prove, is actually my first nonfiction book. That's a law enforcement memoir. And so it's a true story, and there's a lot of material in there that's like this. In fact, the Whiteside case, I talk about it in there. I talk in depth about the interview because it was a very interesting thing to get her to confess. But that's my first nonfiction book, and I do plan to write others. I would like to write this case as a standalone true crime story. You know, I've got 7 novels out there, and I enjoy writing the novels, and in some ways they're easier because, you know, you don't have to worry about all of the litigation and legalities of writing a true crime, but and you don't have all the research, you just make stuff up. So, but I enjoyed writing this memoir, and I'm real excited about it. But I'm excited about that. I'm kind of looking forward to moving into writing more nonfiction, although I'm sure I'll still pump out a couple of novels here and there.
And your novels are under the name Dickie Floyd. Is that correct?
No. They're under my name, Danny R. Smith, but the first series is called the Dickie Floyd Detective Series by Danny R. Smith.
All right. So the other set of books, your original set of books, they started with a character, Dickie Floyd.
There's 2 characters in the book, Dickie and Floyd. So it's kind of a play on that. It's called the Dickie Floyd Detective Series. And part of the reason is these 2 characters, Dickie and Floyd, are inseparable and at times almost, you know, I'd say undistinguishable, but they're very different. But it's just kind of a play on words. But there's Dickie and Floyd are the 2 characters.
I always conflate them into one person.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's my fault that you do that because that's why I call it the Dickie Floyd series. So.
Well, I just think it's amazing that you have experienced some horrific cases in your life and met some horrible, evil human beings, but you've also met some really lovely people who have suffered terribly and have survived horrible crimes. And yet here you are in the next part of your career writing all these books. It's really amazing, Danny. It really is.
Can I tell you one other thing?
Yeah.
So, you know, when I left, I was diagnosed with PTSD, and that's how I started writing. The shrink they sent me to actually suggested it after he read my lengthy answers to his questions. I just wrote out 14 pages of a response, and when he read it, he said, "You should write for a living." And of course, I didn't really think about it at that time because I didn't care. But the point is, he said it would be therapeutic, and that is actually how I started writing. It took me a while after I retired, but I gave it a try, and I found that he was right. It was therapeutic for me to write. And I've been retired now from the sheriff's department. I started a second career, but I've been retired for 18 years from the sheriff's department. No, that's not right. 17 years. And I just now have written this memoir because this memoir was very difficult for me to write. And I talk about my PTSD. I talk about this case. I talk about what this case did to me. And it actually, during the preliminary hearing, I got in trouble in court because I was so on the edge by that time in my career, I was ready to snap. And I did. I was very upset about the lightheartedness in the courtroom, the attorneys that were, you know, joking and talking to these defendants, you know, and carrying on as if we weren't there because a man was burned alive. And I was incensed and I got really angry about it. And when one of the attorneys was questioning my integrity and he pointed a finger at me, I came out of my seat, pointing my finger at him, and I told him, "Don't ever do that again." And the judge lost his mind, and, you know, slamming the gavel. I've never done that before. I've always been very, very professional in court, but it exemplified that was right at the end of my career, and it exemplified the fact that I'd hit a wall. I couldn't take it anymore. All those pieces, they were fragile and just coming apart. And and that's why it was hard to write that memoir, because there's a lot of raw truth in there, and I talk about all of that. I talk about the difficulty of doing this job, and it's something that I don't think a lot of people outside of law enforcement and their families and close friends, I don't think that a lot of them realize how difficult it is.
I have to thank you for sharing something that personal with us, because your frankness, and excuse me, my dog is barking. She's always indicating to me when it's close to the end of a program.
Up, Anna. Yeah.
Right? No, but your frankness about the impact of everything that you experienced as an officer, as a detective, and the totality of that, and the impact that had on you emotionally and mentally and physically, to be able to share that with us in such a vulnerable way. I really thank you for that, because, we look at these cases and we do an analysis, and sometimes it all seems very distant, right? They're right. Facts that we put together and the forensics we put together. But at the end of the day, it's always about a human being and a human life. And so for you to be able to get in touch with that and share that with us, I really, now I truly comprehend, Danny, why you wanted to talk about this case, because now I understand how it ties all the way back to your book and this point in your life about why you started writing. So
you nailed it. That's it. Yeah.
Wow.
No, thank you, Anna. I appreciate those kind words. I really do. And yeah, again, the memoir, I feel like that honesty is needed. And I think that the public's going to really appreciate it, because I'm not the only one. I mean, I think that the bulk of people that leave law enforcement and, they crawl into bottles, or they just get into dark holes. And, very, very sadly, we lose more cops to suicide every year than we do to line of duty deaths. And I think that people need to be more open about it. I had a lot of respect from most of my colleagues, and I worked at a tough place most of my life, but turns out I'm a big marshmallow, man. I mean, things really took a toll on me, and I don't think I'm the only one.
When I first met you and I met your partner, I saw that other side of you, Danny. I saw how vulnerable and how emotionally available both of you were to the mother of the child who was murdered, and how close that you have remained with her all of these years later. So I did see that softer side to you guys. So Danny, where can people find out more about you and your books? Are you on social media?
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm all over social media because I try to promote my books, but I have a website. Murdermemo.com is the easiest thing for most people to remember. Also, DickieFloydNovels.com will get you to the same site. Actually, that's the name of the website. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. I hardly ever use the latter two. But Facebook, I have what's called the Dickie Floyd Novels VIP group. And that's where I do the bulk of my interaction with my readers. They're always the first to know about my new releases and promotions and things of that nature. And I just kind of have a lot of fun on there.
I love it. I think that's great. I love how interactive you are. We're very interactive here on the podcast, especially on YouTube. We get a lot of responses from people who watch and or listen, or as my dog is chiming in right now. Once again, Jackie O, always giving us the cues. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And also I want to let everyone know that this is a special series of ours, the True Crime Daily's My Favorite Case series. And there are a few other episodes that you can check out if you like, which include the firefighter versus the cat lady. Then there's the FBI versus the amateur hot air balloonist. And there's also a deep dive into the trial of killer Jodi Arias. So if you're interested in any of those cases, those podcasts are out as well. Danny, thank you again. We really appreciate you joining us. This is True Crime Daily's My Favorite Case. I'm your host, Ana Garcia, and we thank you for joining us.